Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and we're now joined here in the studio by Dr. محمد الحليم, the political analyst. Dr. الحليم, thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure, sir.
Doctor, now, President Sisi received the DR Congo President Tshisekedi in Cairo, and Congo will be heading the African Union for the year 2021. Now, all the preparations are for the upcoming 34th African Union Summit, set to be taking place and held on the 6th and 7th of this month, in a few days' time. Now, what would we be expecting of Congo's chairing of the African Union this year?
Yeah, it's a good opportunity actually to try to identify Congo, particularly at this particular respect. And so far as Congo, during a long period of time actually used to be one of our dear interests, and France, we are holding very good ties and firm relations, diplomatic, consulatic relations with Congo since quite a long, perhaps during the early 60s, I would say. And as such, we would be very much propagating and very much endorsing and very much evaluating the existence of Congo at the head of chairmanship of the sort of presidency of a union that will be, to my own understanding, helping every now and again in solving a large number of problematic situations concerning the Renaissance Dam problematic issue, as much as the illegal immigrants, the sort of the nightmarish aspect and the sort of the very much troubling details that would leave its deep impact not only within the southern part of Africa, but actually in Libya and many other adjacent countries and European countries as well. And much the same way that it will be, I think, helping in somehow or another in putting an end for terrorism in general, particularly a large number of the the desert and the Sahel, areas are very much dense in reproducing a large number of illegal immigrants, as much as the sort of the crime transcending the border lines and the regular crimes as well. So I would assume the fact that Congo will be playing a very pivotal role, particularly out of its own deep relationship and historical ties with Egypt. And we have had the first-hand knowledge of the whole affair. A couple of years ago, Egypt was at the top of the chairmanship of the African Union. During the course of the lapse of that sort of year, we have had a large number of very much interesting and successful, as much as integrative steps towards normalizing ties among those tussling countries, bringing together all those alienated African countries at one go, trying to help them in almost every conceivable respect by providing them with, cultural details as much as medical instruments and helping hand, actually, in particularly during the pandemic coronavirus, that seemed to be quite devastating the whole world. And I think that Africa was the last of almost all the continents actually to be received what you might call the high tribute. And in the meantime, the toll of the deaths actually in Africa was one of the highest percentages. And as such, I think that from our own vast amount of experience, from our own deep historic ties, as much as the sort of the mutual identification between ourselves on one hand as, at one time presiding over the chairmanship of the African Union, will be propagating very good ties actually in solving a large number of problematic issues, particularly the pandemic coronavirus, actually.
Well, after Egypt chaired the African Union, South Africa took the chairmanship of it last year, which witnessed, as you've mentioned, the coronavirus pandemic, and witnessed a lot of, as well, political unrest taking place in Libya, for instance, also Ethiopia, with the conflicts and the clashes that have been taking place there. Still, there's a lot going on with Sudan. Now, do you feel that, how would you evaluate or rate the South African chairmanship of the African Union? They're also mediating the discussions and the negotiations regarding the Ethiopian Renaissance Dam between Egypt, Sudan and Ethiopia. How do you feel they performed?
Right. In much the same way that the Congo actually will be highly expected actually to be one of those integrative steps towards solving a large number of problematic issues. I think that during the course of the last year, Cyril Ramaphosa actually was paying very good tribute and helping hands every now and again, and providing also what you might call very much successful ways and means through the aid of which he was trying to pacify all the tussles among a large number of countries, particularly the political unrest, as much as the what you might call also the sort of the headache stemming out of Libya since 10 years ago, actually. Particularly, I mean, a large number of illegal immigrants would come from Congo, from South Africa, from the Sahara deserts actually to Libya, and then transcending actually the Mediterranean borderlines to European countries, particularly France and Italy. So, I mean, the sort of the role that is to be played, I think, during the course of the last year by Cyril Ramaphosa was very much not on a local level, but actually on an international level. And I think that the Western world would value very much high the sort of the role that had been played by that sort of president, actually, insofar as it minimizes to a greater extent, side by side with the helping hand and the vast amount of experiences on the part of the Egyptian presidential authority in fighting illegal immigrants, as much as in paving the way actually for putting an end for a large number of penetrating terrorists actually that would cross the coastal line of the Mediterranean Sea, actually getting through Europe.
Well, it seems that over the past 3 years with Egypt, South Africa, and now the DR Congo heading the African Union, it seems that the Ethiopian Renaissance Dam has always been one of the major issues, and still we didn't find a satisfactory solution for the three countries, a legal and fair binding agreement between the three countries. Do you expect the DR Congo, with its mediation, with chairing these negotiations between the three countries, that we can actually reach some sort of an agreement, especially that Ethiopia has been for quite some time as well witnessing a lot of political conflicts and unrest on the ground, keeping in mind that when President Sisi met the DR Congo president today, they also talked about having strengthening their bilateral ties, the economic and trade agreements between both countries, working with Congo in their water resources file. Do you feel that we will finally find a solution for this Ethiopian file?
Well, despite what has been alleged and what has been proclaimed about the inability actually of the presidential authority to find a way out of this quagmire, I would say, and this dire political situation. But this is far from being true. I think that the long peace negotiations and the extension of representing the sort of the dire situation, as much as the bad impact that had been left by the insistence and the arrogance actually on the part of the Ethiopian presidency actually, and Abiy Ahmed's lack of popularity nowadays actually in the eyes of the West and the eyes of the East actually. Almost all these entities are viewing the situation in favor of representing the sort of the right of both Egypt as much as Sudan, in denying and of representing their own extreme sense of rejection of the establishment of the Renaissance Dam. Despite the Declaration of Principles that was back in 2015, that stipulated actually the establishment of that sort of dam, but only on condition that it should be filled and refilled every now and again by the common consensus of opinion of both, you know, I mean, Sudan as much as Egypt, a sort of, you know, of a condition that Ethiopia didn't step and didn't represent and is not abided by on the part of the Ethiopian government. And in much the same way that the case had been widely represented in the United Nations as much as in the large number of assemblies and conferences. To a greater extent, our own situation is very much straightforward. We are not against the reproduction of water for the Ethiopian people. We are not against their own welfare, their own stability and dignity. We are not against their own well-being, actually, in any conceivable respect, as has been propagated by our own, presidential authority, Mr. President Fattah Sisi, in more than one respect, in more than one speech, actually, did represent the simple right of the Ethiopian people, actually, to try to get their own right share, I would say, so to speak, of the water, on condition that both Sudan as much as Egypt actually would preserve the sort of the amount of water that is to be actually fused on a yearly basis. A sort of condition that should be stipulated and should be represented at the end of the day, but on condition that there wouldn't be any sort of infringement upon the values and upon the agreement that had been agreed on and upon during the agreement of the Declaration of Principles in 2015. I think the situation will be, to a greater extent, accepting some slight changes during the course of, Congo's chairmanship of the African Union. Particularly, I think that we are holding very good ties with Congo as well. In much the same way, in more than one respect, the president of Congo actually did declare the simple rights of the Egyptian people actually never to be denied their own simple right of getting their own share of the water on a yearly basis. We are not against all these things. We are on peaceful good ties with Congo as much as we are propagating these negotiations on a peaceful means. The only difference in the situation will be changed whenever we would reach to a consensus of opinion at the end of the day about the timing, as much as the amount of water that is to be filled within the reservoir of the Renaissance Dam, I would say.
Well, what would it take to change Ethiopia's stance? I mean, French consultancy firms have been involved in these negotiations, the US administration, the World Bank, Egypt as head of the African Union, South Africa as head of the African Union. What would it take? And it's been going on for about 10 years now. So what would it take for Ethiopia to change its stance, to come around and come to terms with Egypt and Sudan? Egypt also offered to secure their water share, Ethiopia's water share, and as well export energy to make sure they're self-sufficient with everything. So what would it take?
We are not the only country, actually, that, would go not on good terms, I would say, with the Ethiopian side, but there is Sudan as well. Less than a month ago, actually, there was what you might call little invading troops on the part of the Ethiopian side. And the Ethiopian army, actually, within Sudan, in much the same way that Sudan actually was trying to defend its borderlines with Ethiopia. A clear testimony to the fact that Ethiopia is an invader rather than being a peaceful country, actually, to be negotiated with. But what would strengthen their own situation, actually, on a large scale and on the international arena, actually, the fact that there is a great deal of endorsement on the part of the Israeli side, actually side by side with some taciturn Mossad, pushing forward, actually, the establishment of sort of dam, just by way of putting tribulations within the path of the Egyptian peaceful settlements with Ethiopia as much as other countries. In more than one respect, you can really find that on a large scale, a large number of international powers, as much as intelligence agencies, actually, would cooperate, actually, just by way of representing how the sort of the power of the Egyptian people are very much maximizing to a greater extent, a sort of thing that will be frowned on and upon by the Western world, particularly the intelligence agencies. And I think yesterday, actually, Mr. President Fattah Sisi was holding a very good and very interesting sort of summit, actually, what you might call the Intelligence Arab Forum. In the interests of almost all concerned, I mean, it was one of the most interesting forums to a greater extent that would, to my own understanding, pacify all the disagreements among the Arab countries and the sort of the very much interesting speech on the part of His Own Excellency, Mr. President Fattah al-Sisi, would sum up the whole situation in less than 3 minutes talk, actually. The first dimension, which is the sort of disparity among the Arab countries as being represented on the part of the intelligences of the West, just by way of separating and alienating all these entities in an attempt to never to be unified at one go. The second problematic issue is the fact that all these Arab countries actually are very much securing themselves and very much retiring to their own ivory shells and their own isolated towers without looking on the others, actually, without the sort of exchanging and mutual identifying themselves, the tidings, the news, information with other Arab countries. And as such, they seem to be quite very much securing themselves and very much self-enclosed within themselves to a greater extent, the sort of the thing that will help other intelligence agencies actually of the West to try to take advantage. That's why the third dimension on the part of Mr. Fattah al-Sisi actually was very much successful in his own peaceful as much as straightforward generative talk and powerful invitation on his own part to almost all these countries within the forum to come together actually. If we do fail actually to represent and to achieve what you might call one unified strategic military Arab force at the end of the day, we can be one very much unified entity from the point of view of information, of exchanging the the news and the tidings, as much as representing a sort of a very much immune wall, particularly when it seems to be widespread devastation in large number of Arab countries, not only the African ones, in Syria, in Libya, in Lebanon, as much as in Palestinian territories as well. In Iraq, all these, disputes within all these countries would give us a clear indication that we need each other. We are in a very dire need for one another, particularly from the point of view of exchanging the information, of strengthening our own ties with one another through mutual identifying our own interests and giving each other the sort of the right information and the right time within the right place with the right man as well.
Yes. Well, as Dr. al-Halim mentioned, Egypt has been doing a lot in trying to safeguard the safety and security and stability of the African states. Let's check out this report and we'll be right back.
The Middle East remains a region for the world, forcing various regional players to maintain large-standing armies. Egypt, which is a cornerstone of peace and stability in the Middle East, came in second place on Global Firepower's 2021 Middle East Military Strength list, following Turkey and preceding Iran. James Cleverly, the UK Minister of State for the Middle East and North Africa, said Egypt's regional role is a pillar for security and stability in the Middle East. The UK minister made his remarks during a meeting with Egypt's ambassador to London, Tariq Alel. The UK minister hailed the pivotal role Egypt plays regionally, adding that London is looking forward to continuing coordination and consultation with Cairo as an important partner. Cleverly and Adel expressed their keenness to continue pushing forward for bilateral cooperation programs in all fields, notably healthcare, education and tourism. The meeting also tackled the Egyptian-British relations developments and efforts to strengthen them on various levels. Meanwhile, the foreign ministers of Foreign Affairs of Egypt, France, Germany and Jordan met in Cairo to pursue their coordination and consultation on means to advance the Middle East peace process towards a just, comprehensive and lasting peace. The ministers discussed the recent contacts with their Palestinian and Israeli counterparts and took note of the message addressed by the Palestinian foreign minister to host the meeting. The ministers welcomed the opportunity to discuss potential steps to advance the Middle East peace process and to create a conclusive environment for the resumed dialogue between the Palestinians and the Israelis. They also called upon both parties to deepen their cooperation and dialogue on the basis of further commitments, also in light of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, continuing our discussion with Dr. Al-Halim. Doctor, now, a lot of political analysts and observers such as yourself have hailed the Arab Intelligence Forum that was held yesterday under the leadership of President Sisi and also Major General Abbas Kamel. Now, do you feel, because this is something that it's an unprecedented forum, combining all the Arab intelligence agencies together, sharing information, sharing which could prove to be a much more valuable thing than just any joint Arab action under any sort of umbrella. Do you feel that with such a forum, the political roadmap for the African countries and North Africa within the Arab countries as well, do you think things could be changing in the very near future?
Yes, I think so, very much promptly and very much forcefully, I would say. Nowadays, during the era of the fourth generation war, as much as the fifth one indeed, I mean, the sort of the traditional ways and means through the aid of which you can really invade other adjacent country actually seems to be very minimized to a greater extent. What would seem to be very much powerful and a bit stronger is the sort of exchanging, the sort of the right information that is to be received in the right time and in the right place with the right man in the meantime. This is of supreme importance and supreme importance, I would say. And during the previous era, actually, each single individual Arab country was very much isolating itself out of the rest of its own contemporaries, of its own adjacent neighbors, actually, to a greater extent, representing the fact that it's a matter of state security and state stability, as much as very much confidential, actually. But nowadays, in our own age of transcendence, state of information, of exchanging all these expertise, it seems to be quite of a less value to try to hold and secure as much as box and close almost all the information for yourself, to yourself, by yourself, without benefiting yourself in the first instance as much as your own second next door neighbor in the second instance. And as such, this is the sort of the very much valuable interest and the valuable achievement actually that Mr. Fattah Sisi, I mean, would reach at the end of the day of collecting almost a large number of Arab presidents actually to try to represent their own deep interest in securing as much as safeguarding their own border lines. This wouldn't be attained had it not been the fact that there is a sort of mutual identification and a sense of give and take actually on a large scale, particularly from that point of view. If I say that we have tried a couple of years ago, about 3 years, to try to stabilize and to erect what you might call a unified Arab force that would seem to be the nearest approach to the European Union actually. We failed at the end of the day actually to reach that sort of immune wall actually against the threats of all other European countries as much as the devastating entity on the part of the American administration, no matter new roles actually. And if this is the case, if this is being so actually, I think that's, I see no reason actually on the part of our own presidential authority, why is it not that actually to try to invite all these things and all these tidings and news and information and presidents actually, just by way of bringing them together on a negotiating table. And the
sort of danger is besieging and reaching actually to a large number of our own adjacent neighboring countries, as much as Libya, for example, had it not been for the fact that Mr. President Fattah Sisi said, in the right time in the right place, that certain Jafra is a red line, actually. Yes. Recep Tayyip Erdogan would seem to be quite very much on a very near border line to Egypt. And the decision taken and the decision making in the right time and the right place by our own presidential authority is something valuable, something that we would hail with a great deal of enthusiasm, as much as admiration and assistance and endorsement in the meantime. The sort of the success of the summit is very much interesting to a large number of Western countries, to the extent that they seem to be quite very much worried and very much panicked, actually, of that sort of hidden solidarity that at one go came to be very much endorsed and publicized in the eyes of almost all the Western world and European countries as well.
Yes. Well, in the President's speech during heading this Arab Intelligence Forum, he warned of the foreign interference in the Arab states, in the internal Arab states' affairs, and he talked about the chaos that other foreign powers would want to inflict upon these states to, in a way, control the future of these nations. Do you feel that the rest of the international community will be worried regarding holding such an Arab intelligence forum?
Yes, it goes without saying. Yes, of course. Actually, they are panicked. I wouldn't say that they are, they are out. They are very much panicked, actually, at that sort of master stroke, I would say. It's one of the very much resourceful and interesting hidden ways, actually, that hadn't been publicized before. It's a sort of a taciturn agreement that had been publicized in the right time, by the right man, actually, when he induces as much as invites almost all these alienated parties and these isolated entities, actually, of the Arab countries, each of which would claim that this is its own right claim and its own right property, actually. The ability and the resourceful potentiality on the part of Mr. Fattah Sisi actually to represent them at Wango is one of the master strokes, one of the very much interesting details that will actually reach to the highest peak of success whenever you find that, for example, in Libya. You can really find that the right information when it would come actually in the right time about the besieging Daesh groups that are to be renovated again and renewed to a greater extent, to my own astonishment. Whenever you get the right information actually about the advancement of almost all these groups within the border lines actually, and then to interfere on the part of our own Egyptian armed forces actually to put an end for them on the spot at Wango is one of the very much resourceful means, one of the master strokes, I would say. In Syria, for example, bringing the taciturn as much as the desperate parties in there at Wango at a negotiating table will be very much valued in much the same way that as well in Palestine. Whenever, about a week ago, there is one attempt on the part of our own presidential authority as well to try to pacify the sort of the tussles among both Hamas and Fatah and prepare them in a way for a democratic elections, both in the parliament, that will be in June, next June, as much as the presidential elections that will be a couple of months ago, later. Preparing these people and these desperate parties of the long historical disputes actually among these people will be very much valued at the right time and in much the same way that the president's journey to King Abdullah in Jordan actually was to a greater extent also very much valued and very much highly preparing for the sort of reaching to a consensus of opinion and agreement on the part of both parties to try to participate democratically within the parliamentary elections as much as the presidential one, and in the meantime to reach to the list elections, the sort of the list elections that will try to give its single individual party its own share, if not to try to actually put an end for the seizure of Hamas on the western Strip and on Gaza Strip as well, and on in the meantime an invitation on the part to represent an inducement to Mohammed Dahlan, actually the leading dissident, actually to try to be on the side of Fatah again and Ramallah side by side with Mahmoud Abbas Abu Mazen, just by way of achieving a certain sense of balance. All these, problematic situations within the Palestinian territorial land couldn't be solved unless you exchange a large number of very good information in the right time as quick as possible, because even the information and even the tidings and the news, when they are to be protracted and delayed, they lose their own freshness actually, and become part and parcel of the previous past, not forward to the future.
Yes. Dr. Al-Halim, now, over the past few years, the African Union has been really working on the economic cooperation and integration of the whole, all of the African states, talking about the crises, the political stability, ending the conflicts and putting down the arms. Now, the upcoming year for the African Union, The 34th summit will be held on the 6th and the 7th of this month in a few days' time. The whole theme for the next year, for this year, is arts, culture and heritage levers for building the Africa we want, which seems very much of an artistic, cultural approach to bringing all the African countries together and reaching some sort of, alleviating them into a status where we all want to see the African states. This is dubbed a soft power. How influential and important is this soft power, using the arts, the culture, the heritage, the history of all these countries, going to help the African states, getting them together, strengthening the political, economic and social relations?
Rightly so. I mean, you have said it rightly right now. That's a soft diplomacy. And at times, soft diplomacy and diplomatic ties and relations among countries could be very much valuable in obtaining a sense of integrity and a great amount of resourcefulness and peace in the meantime, at the end of the day. I mean, in the world of politics, you do have this axiom that says that the country that possesses the power and the armed forces actually to try to invade a certain portion of a land and could get it actually with the extreme sense of military power and can get it actually with peaceful means in the meantime is a great entity or a great country. And this is what we do. In more than one respect, we had been accused of defending our own right of getting our own share of the annual water from the Renaissance Dam through the military force. As much as we do have the simple right actually to defend our own border lines very much adjacent to Libya, because as you know that we do have about 1,200 kilometers actually between Libya and between Egyptian border line, but it's more than that. It's about 2,000, because I mean we don't have any presidential authority actually. We don't have Muammar Gaddafi again. We don't have the real entity to be negotiated with. We do have some Daesh groups, some militias, some sects and creeds, and some tribal efforts actually to try to settle all those people together. The extreme amount of effort that is to be paid is very much maximized to a greater extent. And this what would make it a bit difficult. If you look to the African heart, actually, we are living in an African continent, a sort of a black continent, a very much black one indeed, very much impoverished, very much poor to a greater extent, that had been utilized to a greater extent by the Western world, taking its own fortunes, its diamonds, its gold, and its raw materials actually, that had been usurped to a greater extent. And we seem to be quite at the heart of it. For a long period of time, during the previous presidential reign, we had been deprived of almost all the strong ties and the straightforward relations with African countries because of the false attempt of the assassination of the late Mohammed Hosni Mubarak, actually that we stayed for about 15 years, very much deprived of holding any sort of consulatic relations or diplomatic ties with the African countries, the sort of the thing that paved the way for Israel to try to interfere and to take its own advance and to practice an extreme sense of power on the African countries, particularly in Serbia, to the extent that by the lapse of 15 years, Israel used to have about 70 secretaries and about 15 councils during that time. That gives us a clear testimony to the fact that how powerful their own invading ability actually within Africa, the sort of the thing that we are quite unaware of. But owing to the very much intelligent and very much resourceful schematic interest and plan on the part of the presidential authority that we changed our own attitude, we represent our own mutual ties, we know something in common between ourselves, that we are part of them in much the same way that they seem to be quite very much deeply interested in our own heritage and our own culture and our own long history of our Pharaoh's history, of our own monuments. All these things, when they are to be exchanged and they are to be harped on and upon on the human and humanitarian ties actually, I think that they are at the end of the day would strike a very good example of the peaceful means and ways through the aid of which we can really actually come at one together towards the achievements of peace, integrity, and solving our own problems to a greater extent.
Yes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as you've heard Dr. Abdul-Halim saying, there's a lot of work to be done within the African continent among the African states, with the 34th summit, AU summit, being held, that will be held on the 6th and 7th of this month. It has much more of a cultural theme to it, soft power, using soft power to really get the countries back together, resolve all the differences, trying to find some solutions for unresolved issues from the past few years, and solving any new challenges coming up next. And Egypt has been sparing no effort, has been sparing no time to help and find a way to bring all these countries back together and strengthening Egypt's relations with the African states. But unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this edition of the Daily Debate. Before we go, I'd like to thank my very distinguished guest, Dr. محمد Abdul-Halim, the political analyst. Doctor, it's always a pleasure having you with us.
My pleasure, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, please stay tuned for more coming up on Nile International. I'm Hani Saif. Thank you for joining us.